Hey guys, and welcome to CANNAMAntv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this episode I speak with Loveburgh founder and Vitality Kynd owner, Jas Nottay. In this interview, we discuss what led Jas to become active in the cannabis industry, Loveburgh and Vitality Kynd, novel foods, the current condition of the UK cannabis industry, thoughts on adult use cannabis, and the synergy between terpenes, cannabinoids and food. Make sure to like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where, for £3 a month, you can help to build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. I love the little additional plant matter in the background. Perfect.
Yeah, fitting, isn't it? So
Quite right, quite right. No, I'm doing good, man. I actually spent this morning, just before we were talking, doing a review of the recommendations for the macro solicitor's report.
oh, brilliant.
Yeah. So I'll get that edited up and fire it up later on today. So it's exciting. Like, the only frustrating thing that's mainly apparent with it is this complete absence of adult use conversation. It's just never, ever spoken about.
No, I think it's kind of reserved to certain sort of area of the industry. You know, it's like a taboo topic still.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of people are kind of focused on the medical because that seems to be the overtone that cannabis is taking just now, certainly. But yeah, I think more people need to talk about the adult use.
Definitely.
Definitely part of the whole sort of, you know, overall sort of scenario when it regards cannabis, you know.
Especially with the legislation errors that are going on at the moment. They're trying to untangle all these regulation factors. It just seems like that's what we're going to be dealing with again in 18 months' time.
We will be. It's just that's the thing they're trying to embroil everything in regulation, and I think there's a lot of contradicting regulation at the moment, which needs ironed out. So, I kind of have like, I guess I'm quite encouraged in some respects that there is work going on around the regulation because it's progression. You know, we're moving towards something that can be seen as a kind of a, let's say, quote unquote, a legal market, an accepted market. So it's just a nightmare because, you know, like you say, it's all so unraveled in regulation right now. It's contradicting itself, and there's so many things that just didn't quite make sense. But I think that's because we're trying to unravel sort of years worth of prohibition and historical changes that have made no sense to legislation and policy. So that in itself is quite a big challenge, I think. And but it's nice to see it happening, certainly.
Yeah, it's refreshing, even just to just your basis that there's actually official reports from official bodies of people who have influence over government. That's like, you know, at least getting the ball rolling conversation wise. Most people watching this will be familiar with who you are, but for individuals that are not, could you just give a general background on yourself and why you became active in cannabis?
Yeah, of course. So, for those that don't know who I am, Jas Nottay, that sort of behind one of the things Loveburgh. So Loveburgh was my kind of platform to get into the cannabis industry. So I kind of discovered cannabis at quite a younger age, as quite a lot of, I guess, youth do. You know, we were educated on it at school, and sort of going back a little bit further, my family in sort of India are quite involved in cannabis, or certainly have been in the past, and it goes with a wild sort of plant. So I've known of the plant for quite some time, but my involvement from a professional kind of standpoint happened around about 6 or 7 years ago. And that was through sort of personal, I guess, a sort of personal quest to sort of seek changes within myself. So I had some health issues going on at the time, and I found that cannabis was quite an alleviator of my symptoms. So it got to the point where I'd managed to sort of develop a couple of products which have been really helpful to myself, and through that, I kind of wanted to then explore the opportunity of offering that to sort of people on a wider scale. And that's when Loveburgh was born. That was about 6 years ago. And since then, my involvement in cannabis has just kind of become greater and greater, shall we say. You know, I've not been sort of content in just sitting around and making a couple of little bottles of oil here and there. So I've kind of really wanted to help sort of steer the change and do my little bit, I guess, like, you know, for the industry, like everybody else is kind of doing. But so yeah, fast forward 6 years and here we are.
Yeah, no, it's excellent because, in all honesty, Jas, a lot of the times when you go into CBD shops, Loveburgh's on most of the shelves. You know, it's present in most places.
It's quite humbling to see those see the product getting across. And the one thing that really sort of does it for me, Connor, is just the stories that we get back from our retailers and equally customers, you know, on the use of the product. I think that's the reason, like, why I jumped into doing what I'm doing, and sort of why we all continue to do what we do. It's just the feedback that we get. So it is nice to see products, and even hear that products are quite popular on the shelves of stores.
One of the things, how has Loveburgh been affected by novel foods?
Vastly, yeah, quite greatly. So we put a novel foods application in. We've done our own dossier, and again we do a variety of products. So we had to sort of think carefully as to how we were going to structure our novel foods approach. So we went down a few routes. I'm not going to say too much, but yeah, certainly we've got our own dossier in place. So we've safeguarded our own product lines and equally the clients that we manufacture for as well.
Kyle Esplin, obviously the Scottish Hemp Association, is doing great work when it comes to novel foods, and one of the things that seems to be emerging is that Scotland may take a different direction as a consequence of the individuals that are put in this place becoming enlightened to what's actually been going on.
Yeah, and I think anything's possible. I think with the right dialogue open with the right people, I think anything is possible. I'm not too sort of familiar with what's kind of taking place behind the scenes entirely with some of the policies, but from what I do gather, certainly Scotland is looking at different areas of policy development as a whole. And that's not just to include cannabis or certainly the novel foods sort of directive. So again, it's really exciting, and the fact that Scotland's got a bit of autonomy around certain things again makes it an even more exciting prospect that they've got the possibility of doing their own things away from the rest of the bunch.
Yeah, and I'm really kind of hoping that actually kind of steers the way, and it's going to be something that kind of gets promoted in a positive light for Scotland, but obviously for the cannabis industry as well, because very often it does seem to be that Scotland kind of gets forgotten frequently when it comes to the cannabis.
Yes, it does, yeah. We're certainly we're not at the forefront a lot of the times. I think Westminster typically looks at what they're doing down in England and the policies that kind of affect the wider scale UK, but yeah, I mean, I don't think we're at the top of the tree when it comes to sort of policy development with cannabis, especially.
Yeah. I mean, let's say we mentioned earlier, obviously, a lot of the inhibiting factors when it comes to the hemp industry, cannabis industry in particular. I mean, do you see these like with the white paper that we were talking before, putting a cap on 1% for THC and those different other factors? Do you see as the government actually embracing these recommendations?
I'd like to think so. I think there's enough evidence in supporting sort of data from around the world to show that a 1% THC level is acceptable and can be acceptable. And I think when I can't speak for the government, but certainly from a perspective that I've seen from dealing with government and policymakers, they certainly look for tangible evidence and science to really back up their viewpoints. Yeah. And I think the more the cannabis industry can present data and science that really sort of gives validity to the decisions and the choices that need to be made, then the better. Because look, at the end of the day, I think for the most of us that are involved in cannabis, and certainly from the CBD standpoint now, you'll see that there's a lot of science getting involved, especially with novel foods. I mean, it is all science-led. And I think the more that companies and organizations and platforms can sort of leverage the scientific data that's coming out around cannabis and cannabinoids, the better, because that's what helps to make the right changes ultimately,
Yeah. You mentioned it there, obviously CBD industry and obviously hemp industry, these fragmented elements of the same industry, which obviously kind of comes into conflict with each other sometimes because we're dealing with separate legislation that needs to be corrected when the reality is it's under the same umbrella. So I mean, do you think that this is the proposal of a cannabis industry council is a legitimate factor that could then be embraced? Do you think, what teething pains would you interpret, do you think, would come as a result of that?
I think just the cross policy conflicts. I think that's ultimately, I think that there needs to be some form of council that kind of can oversee cannabis as a whole, because I think it's that complex, and like you said yourself, the industry is that fragmented with various policies that conflict each other. There needs to be harmonization of it all, and the only way that typically that you can see that being done efficiently is through some sort of union or some sort of council that will oversee the entirety of that. And I think, again, there is prospect for that. If you look at some other countries, and when you look at Holland, for example, they've got the Office for Medical Cannabis, the OMC, and that's the cannabis overtone right there. That's the umbrella that kind of certainly steers the medical cannabis. I think again, there's always going to be conflicting policies because you've got drugs law, you've got the Misuse of Drugs Act, and you've got a whole host of other sort of compounds that are tied into that. So there's always going to be conflict in trying to take something out of that and put it into another framework along with a whole host of other things. So I think there'll still be separate frameworks because they stay relevant to the various sort of fractions that cannabis has. But I think there definitely needs to be one umbrella that covers that. So the prospect of a council does seem quite fitting, and I think the government would look at sort of options like that. I don't think they would shy away from that at all.
I sincerely hope so, because it does seem to be that it's the UK's kind of lagging behind. You hear all these stories from across the water that X, Y, and Z amounts coming in this month, or we've had this quarterly turnover, and at the same time we're dealing over in the UK with obviously COVID. It's decimated the economy, and we're grasping at a direction to try and realign what we were previously met with. I mean, we weren't in a great state before COVID, and it just seems like I think we've not been here since the war. I think financially,
and I think we're going to move into harder times yet. Personally speaking, just as somebody that's involved in business in the UK and internationally, I can see some patterns emerging. And yeah, I think we are going to go into hard times. But I think cannabis itself is an industry that's certainly helping to change the dynamic of the economy. If you just look at what's happening around the world, and I can agree that the UK is lagging behind in many areas, but I think at the same note, it's certainly progressing forward. And I mean, you've got a project on that's looking to license now a 150-acre site in Scotland and to do medical cannabis and cultivate medical cannabis and to run sort of clinical trial work there. But and I think for operations that are set up in the right way and sort of have the right objectives in place, there definitely is scope to do more. And I think again, it would be great to see like the flip of a button, an industry literally emerge overnight and policy change overnight. But I think because there's been that much conflict between policy and that much contradiction, it's going to take a little while before it actually becomes sort of realigned, into a harmonised sort of way. And look, conservative Britain, we're always the last to kind of make changes ultimately, aren't we? And the rest of the world does things first, and then we'll do things last when we feel it's safe enough. And I think Britain's kind of erring on that side of caution. Okay, you can sort of look at other license holders and say that, well, look, there's been organisations for the last so long that have had licenses and cultivating cannabinoids, so why has it been so difficult for an industry to emerge? But I think now we're in a time that from somebody that is involved in the industry and not just CBD but cannabis as a whole, I can certainly see major changes taking place, and quite quickly at that as well.
That's exciting, Jas, in particular that the 100-acre they just mentioned there, because one of the things that's apparent, I mean, you never ever deal with any form of bureaucratic change with an overnight switch ever. That just doesn't ever happen, obviously. And I think that's when people are so frustrated because they've spent years and years and years with cannabis, personal cannabis use, and then they see these changes internationally, and there's a level of frustration as a consequence of that. But that's really exciting. I mean, so have you got a inhibiting hurdle to get through regulation to put that in place, or is these things ready good to go?
No, we've certainly got our hurdles. I think the nature of the site and the project of what we're developing is certainly coming with its challenges and its hurdles. But we've got the right team and executive board together to allow us to really get through that efficiently. And our aim is to have, one of most sort of premier sites in the UK that's cultivating cannabinoids and researching cannabinoids. So it's not really about the commercial endpoint for us. It's about what we can do along the way as well, really what we can develop, and what we can achieve in cannabinoid therapy. So yeah, it's exciting, but it's not without its challenges.
Yeah, that is exciting. I think obviously with legislative change relating to the controlled substance, that will do a huge thing, because we'll be able to, in particular when it comes to hemp, the destruction of hemp tops and all these different other things, these bizarre circumstances that have played no small part in inhibiting a domestic growth of market. All of these things will be, when these walls start to fall, I think we'll see real change financially. You know, I mean, you mentioned there obviously your Vitality and Kynd. So I mean, could you give you general insight into Vitality and Kynd and what's going on?
Of course you can. So yeah, Vitality Kynd is a concept that I've had for some time. It's a cannabis coffee shop, effectively. So I kind of wanted to achieve, I guess, a fusion between that typical Amsterdam coffee shop with something that's effectively there to achieve a bit more of a health kind of standpoint. So with the Amsterdam or the Dutch style coffee shop, I mean, it is all about going in, you know, you buy it's a recreational sort of overtone to that. You know, you go in, you buy a sit down and consume it whichever way you want. We're not quite about that. I mean, what we're more so about is harnessing all the other components of cannabis and giving it to people in a way that they consume that's sort of really congruent with health. So we've paired or we've created a menu from scratch, and we've effectively paired cannabinoids with various foods and various sort of compound ingredients from foods, which we know have an interaction with cannabinoids and again sort of can sort of compound the effect of cannabinoids, etc. So that's really what we're about. I mean, we've got our own unique coffee that we make. It's infused with craft hemp or cannabis, but the cannabis is cultivated in a particular way and again processed for us in a particular way to infuse into our coffee. Again, we've created our own bake section, so we do your typical cannabis brownies, cannabis cookies. We've got a whole host of muffins. So the typical sort of edibles that you get, they've got cannabinoids in them. We've got some interesting infusion techniques. And what we have managed to do is extract cannabinoids from sort of real cannabis strains, which are, I've got an operation in Canada, so we've managed to extract cannabis terpenes, live terpenes from THC sort of dominant strains, and bring those terpene sets back. So they're completely legal. They're not. There's no cannabinoid content involved with them whatsoever. It's just essential oils. But we've managed to pair those again with particular foods and flavors. So again, you get a real cannabis experience. I mean, you'll know with the essential oils, they typically can come with a bit of an effect. And so again, when you pair that with certain cannabinoids and certain foods, it can have quite an interesting sort of end result, you know.
That's a really innovative approach, Jas, because one of the things that's obviously apparent is the entourage effect and then the collection of terpenes, flavonoids, and additional compounds which have a compounding element symbiotically. And it's really interesting that you would go to such depth to create this synergy between these extremely important compounds and the individual that's consuming them.
100%, yeah. I mean, I didn't want to just open a stereotypical coffee shop or something that was just, you know, serving your regular kind of foods like bacon rolls and whatnot. I mean, okay, we've got our bake section and you know, there's maybe a little bit of sugar content in some of this. I do apologise. Yeah, we've got our bake section, which has got a little bit of sugar content and things, but ultimately, everything that we've created is one, it's plant-based, so it's all vegan. Secondly, it's all paired with cannabinoids and infused in certain ways. So we wanted to create something that was going to have real benefit to people, and not just that, to sort of show a different light of cannabis. To say that, okay, it's not just about getting stoned and getting the recreational side of things, which, hey, if that's what you want to do, fine. Each to their own. There's nothing wrong with cannabis in that way, therapeutically or whatever. But we're not entirely about that. We're more so about showing cannabis in its whole light, you know, and that in itself has got a real focus in health benefits. And if you look at just where cannabis is at the moment, medical, you know, wellness, these are all sort of health. These are all health focused sort of areas, and I think that's what we really wanted to do, was that cannabis can be healthy. It shouldn't be sort of tabooed as the stereotypical gateway drug to other things. You know, it's actually should be used or viewed as just another plant, another herb that's on this planet which has massive beneficial impacts on the human body. And again, you touched on the endocannabinoid system. When you sort of break it down and what the ECS is, and then what cannabinoids are, external cannabinoids, ones that are found in like cannabis plant, and then you see the symbiosis that our receptors have to external cannabinoids. then it kind of really makes you realize that, this is not just about producing anandamide in your brain by consuming delta-9.
Yeah.
It's really a much deeper thing. So you've got the socio-economic side of it all, and the whole change that cannabis can make from just the consumption of it, But then you've got that physical element that it changes people entirely. It helps to regulate things better. It helps to change things in the body. It has a real physiological impact, and that can't be ignored. And I think people need to be aware of that. So for us as a company, i.e. Vitality Kynd, it's really important that we try and maximise the cannabis plant in whichever way we can. And within the legal framework right now, I mean, we'd love to be supplying THC products just now, but we're just not allowed. It's not legal. So what we do is we work within our frameworks, and we try and be as creative as we possibly can. We do as much scientific research as we can, and we conduct as much as we can to ensure that the end result in all of our sort of projects is as best as what it can be, and we're maximising the potential of cannabis.
I mean, that's a tremendous ethos there, Jas, because one of the things that's obviously apparent, as you've mentioned there, is the homeostatic relationship between cannabis and the body. And this is one of the things that is obviously continuously being mentioned, but I think not with the same importance that it should be, because the reality is it seems to be that cannabis is an essential dietary requirement. And I don't think that's any small accident that since prohibition has arrived, we've had these collection of neurodegenerative diseases, which again are inhibited in their progression when cannabis is included in the diet.
And it's interesting that you mentioned the neurodegenerative diseases sort of on the rise, and I don't know if you're aware of this statistic, but Scotland is actually it holds the largest amount of patients that suffer from multiple sclerosis anywhere in the world. So that's quite a worrying sort of fact that our own home country has got MS on the rise, and not just on the rise, but it's got the highest rate anywhere in the world. And yeah, you take that across the globe, and you look at a lot of what I call deficiencies, because typically they can be rectified through the use of cannabinoid therapy. And again, when you take that into account, it's just a deficiency. It's a lack of cannabinoid activity, and when that's rectified, the problem is resolved. So, we've got another, and I can't talk too much about it, but I can just sort of touch lightly over what we're doing. We've got another project in Scotland which is conducting a large-scale clinical trial using cannabinoids for multiple sclerosis. So it's the largest clinical trial in the world, because nobody's done anything with cannabinoids in such a large patient database, specifically with neurodegenerative disease like multiple sclerosis. And so we're quite excited to see what we can sort of unearth using cannabinoids and pairing that, with that sort of disease model. So
that's very exciting, Jas, because I think a lot of the time multiple sclerosis in particular is because it's a non-localized issue. It kind of goes absent when it comes to the research applicability, because I think it's only been in the past 6 months. I might be wrong, but the NICE guidelines have actually altered their recommendations that cannabis prior to the 6 month change was not applicable for chronic pain, and that's absolutely ridiculous. And I mean, I'm assuming that that's changed. I think that's changed, but again, it just underpins the basis of the absence of knowledge through individuals who are influential with the regulations. And just when you mentioned there earlier as well about that you're extracting your terpenoids from THC level plants, that in itself is a benefit, because I think very often if they're doing synthetic terpenoids or extracting from just say low THC plants, you're reducing the availability of the potential of the terpenes, because the reality is they have to have full concert with the actual full plant. And I think that a lot of the time the regulations that are put in place to inhibit a THC level negatively impacts the additional compounds that obviously have a homeostatic relationship anyway.
Totally agree. And I think when you look at cannabis and its therapeutic value, it typically is about the entourage. It's not really just about sort of seeing what cannabinoids do what. It is about sort of understanding the whole plant, and then maximizing and utilizing the whole plant. So it is a little regressive. It's a little regressive to see that certain policy can restrict compounds, and as a result, it then restricts the potential therapeutic value and benefit that the plant has to offer. But on the same token, I think there are areas where research is allowing that to continue. So, and I mean, Canada's one, and we're quite sort of involved in Canada. What we see over there is a lot more progression with regards to research and development and understanding of knowledge. And I mean, they've had a long sort of head start against the rest of the world, so it's understandable that they know a lot more. But yeah, I mean, certainly the therapeutic value. I mean, typically THC strains, and for what reason I personally don't know, but they tend to produce a lot more essential oil content, i.e. terpenes, and flavonoids. For what reason I personally don't know, there must be a logical reason to that, but certainly because of that, they hold more therapeutic value because of the essential oil content that is held. So that's quite promising for research, and we're hoping that some of that rationale can filter through into the rest of the world, whereby they're looking at not just the THC levels and capping them or uncapping them, but more looking at the other compounds that are involved in the plant and seeing how the relationship works between those and cannabinoids and the rest of the things. Because, you know, as I explained to sort of colleagues, you know, THC is THC, CBD is CBD. Where the therapeutic value lies for a plant and where the differentiation comes in is one, okay, the levels, but two, it's more the essential oil content that's found within the plant. So the terpene sets will have a very different value to them and very different respective end result. And that's again where the differences in strains really come from. It's not so much the fact that one's a sativa, one's an indica, or one has loads of CBD and one doesn't. It's more so the terpene content. So I think that's the next phase of development is to understand the relationship of terpenes and flavonoids and how they play their role within the entourage and how they interact with cannabinoids. Because again, you could have a strain with really low cannabinoid content and really high terpene content, and it could be more therapeutic than a strain with extremely high cannabinoid content and say, let's just say mild terpene content. So it's not really always about super duper high THC levels or CBD levels. It's more so about the relationship between all the compounds present. So for us, it's just really about understanding that more and thoroughly. And again, that hopefully that then goes out to the policymakers and the decision makers, and then you can see a bit of a change taking place towards you know, the regulation and policy that kind of surrounds us all.
Yeah. I mean, you touched on it perfectly there, Jas. Actually, the genetic bandwidth is actually, it's so variable that it makes it very difficult when you see a lot of individuals attempting to create a standardized mode of testing. It makes it almost impossible because of the level of variability that is applicable to all these different compounds.
It is. And the only standardization you can get is to really sort of determine what compounds are what. Again, from just working with some of the scientific world, we can see that where the standardization is coming from is more in the analysis of cannabinoids and determining what they are and more accurately. Because as you're well aware, like, you know, cannabis is so complex. You know, one, you've got the genetic variability, but two, you've got over 400 compounds just in the cannabinoid family alone. That in itself is quite complex. So I think
I like that, quite complex.
a little bit, just a little bit. I think just getting a grip of that's not going to be an easy task for anybody, really.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the reasons why cannabis is just causing like a bit of a headache to policymakers, the scientific world, because they can't standardize it.
Yeah.
And for guys like us, I mean, I'm a naturist. Whilst I appreciate there's a requirement for science, and I certainly go down the scientific route a lot, I find my roots, and excuse the pun, back in nature.
Yeah.
So it's great to see that the scientific world can't get a grip of this plant, because ultimately it's too complex for our understanding, and that's amazing because it humbles us a lot. It should humble us a little bit.
Yeah.
We don't know as much as what we think we know and what we would like to know, and that's just a fact. And cannabis certainly shows us that its complexity to us is like awe-inspiring. To the cannabis plant, it's just a humble plant. Popped its seed and off it goes and it does its thing. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
For us, we can understand that's a bit different. So, it's definitely kind of an interesting one.
Yeah, Jasmine, essentially we've covered most of the things. You want to say anything before we get going?
No, just thanks for getting me on. I think I'm definitely sort of humbled and honoured to come on to the CANNAMAntv show. So Yeah, thank you for letting us say a few words.
Thanks to Jas for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoy the content. I'll see you next time.